Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm going to begin with a personal story because you don't usually grow up wanting to be a political scientist. 10 years ago, when this country celebrated its 60th anniversary, my youngest son, who was 8 years old and in grade 2, was told by his teachers, write a birthday card for the country. Everyone in class said, I want my soccer team to win or something. My son wrote this birthday card in which he said, I wish the country a more stable government. I understood I was doing something right. So I'd like to talk about stability. And when we talk about stability, we're talking about a country that is perceived as unstable. But I'd like to give you a different perspective on that. Let's talk about democracy. Democracy is made up of two words, the demos, us, and the kratos, the rule. But when we talk about democracy, there's nothing in that definition that talks about how democracy is going to be stable. In order for democracy to be stable, we need institutions. We need political parties, we need elections, we need parties. That's exactly what I focus my research on. Because without democratic institutions, we cannot have democratic stability. Let's talk about the main democratic institutions. We're talking about whether we are either going to be a presidential democracy, some of you are familiar with these systems, the United States, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil. In a presidential democracy, essentially, you elect the two branches separately. The president is the executive branch, Congress is the legislative branch. They're elected separately, and they survive separately. In November, Congress will be elected. If the Democrats take Congress, they cannot oust Trump from office. They are elected separately, and they survive separately. If you remember your high school textbooks, this is the separation of powers. That's a presidential system. A parliamentary system is exactly the opposite. We have this in England, we have this in Canada, in Germany, and in Israel. In a parliamentary system, we don't separately elect the two branches, we elect only one, only the legislative branch. The government emerges from the legislative branch. The government rests on a majority in the legislative branch. And if that majority collapses at any time, we can have a vote of no confidence, and the government is removed from being the government. In other words, this is not the separation of powers, this is the fusion of powers. These are two different, stable democratic systems. But we also have elections. When we vote, you can have a personal vote. You go and vote, there are people's names on the ballot. You can pick them because you like their party's ideology, or you can pick them because you like their individual characteristics. You can also vote for people in districts. These are the 435 districts in the US Congress. When you vote for a person in a district, you have to count the vote in a majority system. One person will win, everybody else will lose. So this is a personal, district, majority-based electoral system. On the other hand, you can have Israel. In Israel, we don't vote for people. None of our politicians are elected. We vote only for parties. It is the parties that make up the decision on who our candidates will be. We have no districts. The entire country is one voting district. If you're going to vote for parties nationwide, you cannot have a majority electoral system, so we're proportional. Now, don't mix between the type of democracy and the type of election, because the United States is a presidential system, Britain is a parliamentary system, but they both have the same electoral system. So the minute you choose the type of democracy, it has no impact on what type of elections you're going to have. That's a completely different decision. Think about Starbucks. We've all at one point been stuck at some airport and gone to Starbucks. What is Starbucks selling us? They're selling us coffee and milk. But based on the different packaging, it could be a latte, a cappuccino, a macchiato, or if you want to take it a step further, you can make dozens of different combinations with coffee and milk. So if you look at democracies and talk about the type of government and the type of elections, you will have as many examples as you will have countries in the world. So let's go back to talking about stability. Were we stable as a country? Yes, we were very stable as a country for quite some time. Why? Because we had two large parties in Israel. We had many parties, but we had two large parties. We had leaders like David Ben-Gurion, like Golda Meir, like Menachem Begin. These are world-class leaders that we had in this small country. If you look at the first 50 years that this country existed, we had 14 elections. Now, I don't care what country you're from, math is the same. If you divide 50 by 14, approximately 3 years and 7 months out of a maximum 4-year term of office, which means with all of our parties, with our proportional electoral system, with our social divisions, with our parliamentary democracy, government survived for almost their entire term of office. This is quite good. What went wrong? This is the results for the two largest parties in Israel in the first 35 or so years of our existence. From 1949 up until the 1980s, you see the bottom line in red is the largest party. The top line in blue is the two largest parties. You see that the largest party is somewhere between 40 and 50 seats. The total number of seats in the Israeli parliament is 120, so a majority is 61. If the largest party is between 40 and 50 seats, it just needs one more other partner, maybe two, and it has that majority. In other words, you don't have one party that wins, but you have one party that dominates. This is an example of one election result in Israel, 1969, where you see the Labour Party won 56 seats. So to form a majority in a parliamentary system, which requires at least 61, that one party was almost there. It dominated the system. What happened? This is the next 35 years. The largest party goes down from about 50 seats on average to close to 30. The two largest parties, who had almost 100 out of 120 seats, go down to together not having a majority of the seats in the parliament. You might remember this guy, Ehud Olmert. In 2006, his party won only 29 seats. Again, math. If the governing majority has to be at least 61, and the Prime Minister's party is 29, that means the other partners he will bring in to form the majority will outnumber his own party. You know this guy. In 2009, he won the elections with only 27 seats, even less. We today are in a situation where it takes so many parties to form a government that A, it's difficult to form the government, B, it's difficult to keep the government together, and C, it's difficult for the government to govern. Smaller parties have become veto players in Israeli democracy. This is a mathematical equation in political science called the effective number of parties. It's the number of parties, their size, all thrown into an equation. Look where Israel is compared to any other country. If we had an Olympics on number of parties, we would win the gold medal. But the institutions weren't changed over the last 70 years. So what happened to make those large parties decline, making Israeli democracy so difficult? Are we, if we're looking up to the 100th year of this country, are we looking at the continued decline of the large parties or not? Before I answer that, I have to ask, why did the large parties decline? And for that, you have a whole host of reasons, but probably the most important one is that Israeli politics focuses on security issues, not on domestic, social, and economic issues. We have hawks and we have doves. They have both been in power. They have both promised us that if we build more settlements or dismantle settlements, we will have more security. Neither side has delivered, which means it took us a while, but in 2011, the people took to the streets. 500,000 people took to the streets in Israel, protesting social justice. 500,000 people in a country that's only 7 million. That's 7% of our population. When in the United States did you ever have 25 million people protesting? And the politicians didn't react, so the people did. And they started voting for parties that don't focus on the security dimension. You might remember that Ariel Sharon broke off from Likud and formed Kadima in 2006, then Tzipi Livni formed Hatnu'a in 2009, and then Yair Lapid forms another party in 2013, and Moshe Kahlon in the last elections. If I can get another 30 seconds, I want to teach you a little bit of Hebrew very quickly. What does Kadima mean? Forward. What does forward mean? Not backward. Okay. What does Hatnu'a mean? Movement. What does movement mean? Yesh Atid means there is a future. Are they running against a political party in Israel called We Have No Future? Kulanu, all of us. Parties are paying a lot of money to come up with names that will send a clear message to the Israeli voter. We're not focused on security issues. We're selling you something else. The problem is that these parties come and these parties go. They rise meteorically and they crash. So how can we get the Israeli voter to think about, once again, voting for large parties? Well, honestly, we can't change the people of Israel. So we have to change the people, the way they think. Now, we don't want to change the people, but we do want to change the way they think. And there are two answers that are thrown around. One of them is the more popular answer, the one that our politicians focus on, the one that the public kind of understands, and that is to simply be brutal, to decapitate the smaller parties. How many of you remember who this guy is? Robin Hood. Why do we remember Robin Hood? Vered, collective memory. We remember him because he took from the rich and gave to the poor. Who's this guy? You don't remember the bad guy. The sheriff of Nottingham. Because he took from the poor and gave to the rich. Every electoral system in the world is the sheriff of Nottingham. There isn't a single democracy in the world that takes the smaller parties and gives them a higher percentage of seats. That's not democracy. But there are a lot of electoral systems in the world that penalize the smaller parties. In the American single-member district system, anyone but the winner is penalized. In a national proportional election, we call it the threshold. And this is what our politicians love to talk about. Let's raise the threshold and kill all the smaller parties. Well, recognize this flag? This is the Netherlands. They have the lowest threshold in the world at about 1%. After the Netherlands, we get to Denmark at 2%. Then we get to Spain. We're heading up to the World Cup. You guys should know these flags. Spain is at 3%. Sweden is at 4%. Germany is at 5%, and that's where things stop. And Germany is at 5% because of Weimar, because they want to keep the extreme right wing out of power, which worked very well up until the last elections. Where is Israel? We're already between 3 and 4%. We can't play with this much more. If we play with it a lot more, we will start disenfranchising so many people who go and vote that we start walking down a slippery slope that leads us to 7% is the threshold in Russia. And if you really want to kill small parties, there's a guy called Erdogan who can tell you how to do it. And that's Turkey. So this is a simple answer. It's an answer that won't work. It's an answer that we've practically maximized. We have to think of something better. And that better thing is called a reform that will change the way Israeli voters think, change the strategic tactics that are in their head when they go to the voting booth. If you tell the Israeli voter, look, the largest party is automatically going to be the party that's going to form the government, and every other small party will just have a decision whether they want to be in or out. In other words, they can't decide for the large parties. Now, this is a simulation. You've got on the right wing 3 parties who together have a majority of the vote. But if you look on the left, you have one party that's just a little bigger than anybody else. So according to this system, you have the majority of the vote on one side, but you have the largest party on the other side. They win. Now, if the voters know this, then some of the more right-wing voters will say, I'm not willing to lose to the left just by 2%, so maybe, just maybe, some of their voters will move. and then they win. This is changing the way voters think. And if 2-3% move in one election and it begins a trend, after 5-6 different elections, we'll be back in a world where two large parties dominate a multi-party, proportional parliamentary democracy that is once again stable. So, ladies and gentlemen, we were once stable. We didn't change our institutions, we became unstable, and we can once again become stable. Because if we don't know where we're heading in the next 30 years, we could be continuing the decline, or maybe we can go back to where we were not so long ago. My time is up, so I want to thank you for your support, for being able to employ the graduate students who do the kind of work that we give our politicians proposals that aren't the easy ones that they want to push, but maybe the correct ones that will lead this country back to a period of more stability. Because we don't want to change the institutions of Israeli democracy. They are quite good. We don't want to change the people in Israel. They're very good. And we can make our democracy stable again. Thank you.